Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm joined here by Chris. If you have no idea who this is, he has an amazing channel, Coding in Public, and the best Astro course that you could possibly take. But we're going to talk about his course in a little bit, but I just want to welcome him and have him give us a quick intro and tell us about why he chose to use Astro.
Yeah, well, thanks for that great intro. That was very kind of you. Yeah, I do love Astro. I've used it since the early betas. It kind of came along as I was learning web development. People may or may not know this, but I've started coding in like 2020 just on the side. And as Astro started to come kind of into the public sphere, it was right when I started learning a lot of the things that I needed a framework for. And so it's been nice to kind of grow alongside the framework to where just as I'm like, oh, I really need to get more into backend stuff or database stuff, like Astro drops this Astro DB or whatever it happens to be. And so it's allowed me to kind of really progressively grow with it. And I think generally speaking, that's one of the things that I like about Astro is it's like a really easy onboarding ramp for anyone. So you can be an advanced dev and it has like kind of everything you need now, or you can be just starting and you can really start with the very basics of just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then you can add on more complexity as you need it. But the on-ramp is super short. And I think that's really helpful and has helped the framework a lot.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's actually like the number one reason like why I really love Astro is because you could literally start if you are a new developer and you're just learning HTML and CSS and a little
Right.
bit of JavaScript. Astro like is a great way to get started because you could get really far. Like actually, I actually
Yeah.
love using Astro without having to pull in unnecessary like frameworks unless you really have to, like unless you're gonna make some dynamics. So it's like I love that flexibility. And I had some like customers who like have very simple like websites like for their restaurant or their like small business, and it's like I don't need a whole big thing. Like I'll
Right.
just get it started with Astro. And that kind of brings me like to my first question. I want you to kind of share like from your perspective Astro like overview and its philosophy and why it's awesome, from static site generation, like minimal client side JavaScript, and built for SEO if someone like needs that as one of the important features.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the nice things Astro has to its advantage, which is just its timing. Like it comes into the ecosystem while a lot of these frameworks have kind of gone through a lot of modern pain points. So Astro has been able to learn from a lot of that. So as it came on the scene, it was able to really kind of be a forerunner in a lot of like the return to the server and a lot of things like that. But so I think Astro like has captured a lot of people's minds because it's kind of the most modern framework there is, in my opinion, because it's been able to learn from everyone else. But yeah, as far as what it is, it started essentially as a static site generator. And so from that, it's super fast. It also, again, borrowed a lot of those really modern patterns. And so it's familiar to especially JavaScript developers who've worked in other frameworks, but it's also familiar if you're just starting with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Constraints are one of those things that I think has actually really allowed Astro to expand a lot. Sometimes when you try to be everything to everybody, you end up, broadening out so much that you don't really have a story. And by Astra coming on the scene, first of all, is basically a content rich framework. Like it's for content that allowed it to really choose and make choices based on that kind of target goal. And so because of that, it was able to really double down on like content collections to have type safe markdown, which is something nobody else still has done. If you've ever tried to roll something like that in another framework, you know that it's just basically impossible. And you've got to write so much that at that point, you're just like, well, I'm sure all the metadata is fine, but Astro is so good at that. The other thing I think it's done is by this kind of return to the server, it's also has this kind of node.js by default opinion as far as client-side JavaScript. And by limiting itself to content, by being server first and borrowing from a lot of these modern patterns, it's allowed it to have fast rendering times. And, like you mentioned, that usually benefits SEO as well. You can obviously mess that up yourself as a dev, but Astro kind of makes it hard to build a slow site and makes it hard to build a site that doesn't do well with SEO. And so it gets a lot of the basics really right. And then if you need more complexity, the fact that you can literally pull in almost any framework means that if you've been writing in Next.js or whatever, Svelte or whatever, and you want to just port those components in, it's literally just one line CLI script and then you're in. And I think that's, that kind of flexibility. I call Astro the Switzerland of the web because it's like, we don't have to fight. We can just use whatever you want. It doesn't really matter, So I think those are some of the things that have made Astro special. Why I like it. It's focused on content. It borrows a lot of modern patterns, zero client-side JavaScript by default. But as soon as you need more complexity or you want to pull in components from other frameworks, you can easily do that. So that kind of makes Astro, to me at least, the best of all worlds in just about every application you're building for the web.
Yeah, no, it's pretty awesome because like if you're building a content heavy like website, I think Astro is definitely should be like a huge consideration, especially keeping in mind the performance. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about Astro is, using like a headless CMS like Strapi, like I was able to really find a place for it to manage content that like a non-technical editor could like edit. Like one of the things I do love about Astro is that you could just store everything in Markdown and it's like perfectly fine. But some people like they're like, oh, I need a back, like I need an admin panel. I'm not very technical. So like I love the flexibility that it offers. And especially, if you're making content heavy website, you want it to have best performance possible for SEO, like Astro definitely is the way to do it. And I remember when I started learning Astro, like I literally wanted to challenge myself. I'm using Astro and I'm only going to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I was just amazed. Like, first of all, it was like a joy writing vanilla JavaScript. I don't know,
Yeah.
like if it's just me, but it was like first of all, I was like, do I still remember how to write like JavaScript? That was like the first question. So it was like a very like cool experience. And then I also realized that for certain like functionality, I don't need a lot. And so writing a little bit of JavaScript was a way easier than like bringing in a whole like framework. Another thing that I also at the same breath as I say this, I was like, oh man, I have this one component, like JavaScript. I haven't really, done it for a while, but I've done a lot of React, and just the fact that you could bring that one piece in
Yeah.
and write that, I was like, oh, that's like brilliant, and so that's amazing. So can you just tell us a little bit more about like Astro, like in terms of like shipless JS, and talk a little bit about island architecture and why it's awesome?
Yeah, I think the whole like no client side JavaScript by default, it's definitely an opinion, but I think it's becoming more and more popular as as far as the story of the web, we went from like obviously just little tiny scripts to do small interactions, which is the original, and then we went to this full JS like SPAs where you just dump a huge amount of JavaScript on a page to render essentially the entire site, even if they've just come to one page. And you take the performance out up front and then you hope that as they stay in your site it's super fast and that kind of stuff. But I think now we've realized there's a lot of benefit to doing most on the server, and most content rich sites, they're not needing a ton of super intense interactions. So Aster's done a lot of really smart stuff to allow you to kind of know exactly you're running JavaScript on the client, when it's running on the server. You can even do some cool stuff with streaming and stuff, which we can talk about later. But yeah, so by default, there's no JavaScript run, even though obviously you're using JavaScript to produce your pages and stuff. You're using templating language, very much like JSX to template out your site. When it actually comes to running client-side JavaScript, you have to explicitly opt in. So there are basically two ways to do that. One is with vanilla.js, which I agree with you. I really like vanilla.js. I don't know if I'm just a cave person or something, but I just think it's great, But you can just write script tags, and the cool thing is like it's borrowing a lot of these modern patterns. So you've got TypeScript enabled by default in a script tag. You can import, that means directly in a script tag. It modularizes all those script tags. So there's a lot of really cool stuff it does without you having to think about it. You just literally drop a script tag on any page or in any component and write vanilla JavaScript. So that's the first way to opt in. And it's very explicit because you're on the page within a script tag. The other way is like you mentioned with this thing called island architecture. And that's the idea of bringing in other client-side frameworks, so React or Vue or Svelte. And so what you can do is install that package in your Astro project, and then pull in any Svelte or Vue or React component, and then you give it a little directive called client whatever. And there's client load, client visible. That's usually my favorite. And the idea is Astro will render all the HTML up front using that plugin. So it'll take the React component, render all the HTML on the server, and then it just hydrates that with JavaScript when you tell it to. You have to actually explicitly, though, give it a command, client load or client visible, whatever that happens to be. So client visible, like I mentioned, is my favorite because what it will do is it'll render all the HTML ahead of time, but it won't be interactive until you actually scroll to that point on the page. Sometimes you might have like in your footer a newsletter sign up. Well, if they never get to the footer, why would you want to load React to actually handle that? So let's say it's a React component. You drop it down there. You just say client colon visible. And then once you get down to the footer, Astro says, let me grab what I need to actually run that component, and it pulls it right in. So you get lots of control over when client-side JavaScript runs. And there are other like cool patterns as well, like server islands, which we can talk about later, and other kind of cool patterns they've done to give you a lot more control as well. But that's kind of the basics of how to run client-side JavaScript in the couple of different choices you have.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. And yeah, to me, I feel like that flexibility just gives so many different ways that you could approach building your project. And I love the fact that you could start simple if you have like a small use case for a website. And as your project evolves, you could easily add additional, more complex like functionality if you need
Yeah.
it. That's pretty awesome. I know like people gonna ask because there's fanboys everywhere, and it's okay to be a fanboy, fangirl. Like you have your favorite framework, here we are talking about Astro. Like some people like talk about Next.js. Some people like really like, like TanStack is the way to go. And I think like one of the things that I always try to say, it's like, pick the framework that's right for the project that you're working on.
Yeah.
But from, people would always like want to ask about, comparisons, like from your experience, like if you were to compare using Astro versus like Next.js or something like that, some of the things you would say differ or stand out.
Yeah. Well, Next.js obviously has been around longer and is a more mature framework. So you should expect that there are some things that will be available in Next.js that wouldn't be in Astro. But it also means that there's some complexities built in, that you've kind of got to get over. So I'd say, first of all, as far as when to choose one or the other, if it were me, my default now is Astro, and it has been for a while now. And that is because most of the sites I'm building are content-rich sites. They may need a little bit of JavaScript here or there, a couple components, maybe even a whole section of the site that's just React, but most of it's just content, and you get all the benefits of content collections and a lot of the kind of cool patterns, zero client-side JavaScript by default. Like those are the kinds of things that like I would, you get out of the box with Astro without having to do really any setup. Obviously, with Next.js moving more towards the server as well, like that gap has narrowed. So I would say for me, I choose Astro when, especially if you're a beginner or if you have a simple, landing page or site. There's just no reason for me to have to worry about a lot of the complexities Next.js brings. Or if you have a content-rich site and you want the benefits of things like Markdown, content collections. So for me, that's most of the sites I'm building. Really, the only reason I would personally reach for React is if you have a really complex rendering strategy where you need like a lot of the ISR and stuff like that, even though Astro has closed a lot of that gap too, honestly, or you have just a pretty complex app that needs a lot of the benefits that some of the more advanced features in Next.js gives you. It's kind of gotten to the point for me where unless you know you need Next.js, you should be
Yeah.
choosing Astro.
Yeah.
So if there's a particular reason to choose Next.js, then choose it. Otherwise, you should choose Astro. And mostly for me, that's advanced rendering and a couple of a couple of more like SPA type style things where you realize like, hey, my whole product is basically this SPA. To me, sure, use Next.js. You can run the front end, the kind of the landing page and stuff like that in Next.js too, if that makes it easier to keep it all in one repo. But for me, the default is Astro and choose Next.js if you know there's a particular use case that you need it for.
Yeah, and it's a very important point that you made. I remember when I started my development journey, Redux was like super huge and popular. And I remember learning React. I just wanted to learn React. And my friends like, oh, you need to learn Redux. And it just overcomplicated my learning journey to a
Yeah.
point where I was just kind of like, I couldn't learn like everything because nothing made sense. My other friend, he goes to me like, Paul, if you don't know what Redux does or the problem it solves, you shouldn't use it. And I was like, oh man, I was listening to all these friends that I had telling me to learn Redux, and here I am, have no idea what problem that it solves, and even if I need it. And I think kind of being able to step back and kind of look at the requirements of your projects to figure out what is the best and quickest solution that you could choose and that makes sense and go with that. And to me, I always kind of play with the idea if I were like freelancing, like what would be my tech stack? And I thought about like to create like this, workflow that will allow me to build things quickly and fast and have some reusable components and something that will be fast and performant. Because again, like when you're building like because I'm a solopreneur, let's say, and I'm building websites for like small business or marketing websites or content heavy websites, I'm like, Astro just makes sense. And for me, combining it with like a headless CMS, like it just makes such a good experience for the user. And it's something I could like do fairly quickly, have a quick like turnaround and just focus on a very particular niche of type of websites and have like a very fast workflow. So from that standpoint, I was like, oh, that's like pretty awesome. And I did want to ask a question, like since we were talking about Next.js and Astro, what are the deployment options for Astro? I know like with Next.js, like you could deploy it like in other places, but mostly like you kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
Vercel is the way to go, which if you're using Next.js, like I would just say deploy in Vercel because it's such an
Right.
easy experience. But for Astro, like it almost like you could deploy it anywhere.
Yeah, that's the cool thing is like you really anywhere you want to deploy, you can. There's obviously some limitation depending on what your server needs are. So there's these things, yeah, your server side rendering like adapters. They have a few that you can use. There's just a node adapter. So if you can run node on your server, then that would work. And there's also Netlify and Vercel and Cloudflare. So you can kind of run it anywhere you want on the edge, wherever you need it, it can be built. I have a bunch of sites all over the place. I've got some that I just statically build and like literally drag over to like old school, to drop it in some, bucket somewhere. I've got stuff on Vercel, I've got stuff on Netlify, got stuff on Cloudflare. Like, so there's just a lot of flexibility and you're really not scoped at all. In fact, I've taken a site from Vercel and moved it to Netlify by literally just switching out the adapter. Nothing else needs to happen. So they really try to kind of separate out those concerns. You build wherever you want or however you want. You then deploy wherever you want. And if you want to switch any of those layers out, it's really easy to do because it all kind of comes through the Astro ecosystem and you just swap those pieces out as you need to. So that is a huge benefit. And even though Next.js technically can be hosted anywhere, to your point, really, I've only seen it work well in Vercel, although I think they're trying to change that story, but
Yeah.
they have an incentive not to because they own it, and that's fine. There's no problem there, but that is a huge benefit to me.
Yeah, no, that makes like perfect sense. And I guess like one of the things like I remember in a couple of conversations ago we had, one of the things you said, you had this Astro site that you deployed like long time ago and you were just like it still works, and to me that was like very like amazing, and I'd love to like have you kind of elaborate a little bit more about it, because like if you try to like if you maintain any projects for any amount of time, you know that sometimes there's an update in like what the hell is going on, and it just adds this like overhead, and sometimes for the type of project that you made maybe that's not necessary, and like Astro like maybe will help you to avoid that, since like you could just it's you could it's less stuff, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah. So from your experience, like, how was that been?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely like yellow updated sites 2 years old and they just work, which is
Yeah,
crazy. That
yeah,
just doesn't happen in the web, and I think a lot of it is Astro got a lot of its patterns right at the beginning with templating, and
yeah,
since there's not client side JavaScript by default, really the only JavaScript that was messed up was stuff I messed up on. So when I ported stuff over, a lot of the rest of their patterns stuck, and they've had very few breaking changes through the years. I really have updated multiple sites that were a year or 2 years old and they just work. And usually, if they do deprecate something, it's over the course of like a year and a half where they're previewing, hey, we're going to change the way this API works. Now, some of that is just the youth of the framework. I'm sure, like Next.js, like when Next.js changes something, it breaks it for a ton of people just because there's so many people using it and there's a lot more complexity there. But I really think Astro has taken a really purposeful approach to its changes. And because of that, the implications when they release something isn't like, oh no, what do I have to change? It's more like, oh sweet, like this is a cool new feature. And it's all progressive. So like I don't have to use everything Astro has. So if they add some new feature, it's not like it breaks my entire site or like I have to go from like a, like next recent transition to the app directory. Like I don't have to do major shifts like that. Probably the biggest one has been the recent content collection that opened up things like Strapi just because you had to change where the config file was. But even now, if you run an old project, they'll do all that porting for you still. And eventually they're going to drop that support. But I think that's really cool that Astro tries to really not introduce unnecessary friction. And I feel like a lot of other frameworks I've worked in, it's just like every time I hear there's a release, I'm not excited. I'm like, what do I have to do now? And with
yeah.
Astro, it's more like there's just new candy I get to play with, and that's a cool experience to have.
Yeah, so with that, like, let's talk a little bit more about like Astro, like content loaders. Because what I love about Astro is that you could add things in many different ways. And when I work with Astro at the beginning, like I just made like a project that I'll share in the description, Astro and Strapi, which is pretty cool. I wanted to do it as quick as possible, make it very simple, and I literally just call my data in the front loader. Like, it's viable solution that works because it statically builds. Like it's perfect, but you could now use content loaders. I actually started working on a content loader. It's a community project for Strapi. I'll link it in the description below. So if anybody wants to help out, you're welcome. But I think like content loaders give you that ability to load files from within Astro, or you have like your Markdown, or you could call like an external API by creating a custom loader for Astro. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and also some of the exciting features about it?
Yeah, the content really, again, that's kind of its core story. And in some senses, like I said, I think that's been really beneficial. It's scoped Astro and allowed it to really pick an area to fight in. I think too, people hear content and they think simplicity. But actually, really, there's a ton of, I wouldn't say complexity, I would say like advancedness to it. Like they've really thought through a lot of the use cases, and you can run hundreds of thousands of pages through their stuff, and everything is just type checked and it works for you automatically. not to trash Next.js, but just real briefly, I'm working in a Next.js site for work, and we have a blog, and it's like every time I add any metadata, there's no checks on that. And so we can write manual checks for every single thing. And we have it for some, but it's just like I'm always having to triple, quadruple check. In Astro, I don't have to do that. It won't even load the dev server. It tells me the exact line where it's got a problem. So I've talked about content collections a little bit so far. We both have, but to give people a general, maybe a history of it, and then we can move into the content loaders. It started with local Markdown MDX markdoc files, where you have a front matter section, and then you have the actual content. And you have a config file where you can use Zod to validate all that metadata, which means like if I have two authors, like Chris Pennington, one without the H because I left it out accidentally, and one with the H, they'll be represented differently, or it'll check against that a config and say, hey, this doesn't work. It's not one of your authors. And so it does all that type checking for you automatically. It'll even check to make sure that if you say there's an image that your front matter links to, that the actual image exists locally. Now, local content is great, but like you said, there's a lot of people who are non-technical, or people who just would prefer to update their site outside of their repo. They'd rather just jump on a quick CMS and take care of that. And there's lots of great reasons for that. So recently they introduced content collection, like these content loaders. What content loaders allow you to do is to pull in data from literally anywhere. And that means locally on your machine, like you could literally just pull in like a SV or like a, I don't know, a CSV file from your desktop if you want to. I don't know why you would, but you could do that, or you can pull from like a CMS. You can also write custom loaders, which is what all these frameworks or other tools have done. But those custom loaders, you can load data in from anywhere. So you can hit an API endpoint, and all this is done safely server side. And then again, all that is checked and type checked against your schema. So you get the benefits of being able to literally pull data in from anywhere, but you don't have to worry about writing all this like type checking and making sure that everything actually fits your schema. Astro does that for you. You've used the same kind of patterns that they have throughout the rest of the Astro project, using Zod to validate, saying this has to be a string of no more than 50 characters, and you can throw a custom error message if you want to. So those kinds of patterns have made it really flexible, which also means like you can switch between data points very easily.
Yeah.
So let's say you have local files, and then you say, hey, I want to move this all to Strapi. There's no problem at all in that. You literally just swap out the loader, put your stuff up on Strapi, pull it in, and your site literally receives it the exact same way because it all flows through the content collection. So it actually makes your data super flexible and pliable, and it's easy to actually try out services and say, let me give this a shot. And because your front end is pulling from the same kind of structured data, your data layer ends up being, again, agnostic, just like the hosting. So Astro kind of lets you plug and play as you need to and get all the power of wherever you want to pull your data from. And content collections is kind of the tunnel through which everything flows. And so you have a really predictable outcome. So yeah, that's kind of the pattern of what they've gone for and where it is now with content loaders.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I do enjoy that flexibility. And again, like for me, someone who started with Astro not too long ago, the fact that I was able to easily jump in and pull data like right in the front matter. But then it's like, okay, I have a lot of data, a lot of different sources. That's where the loaders come in and you get much better experience. Everything is type checked, which is pretty awesome. And I love the fact, like you said, like there's this like smooth ramp up to adding additional functionality and complexity. And again, like I love Strapi, but sometimes like I just want to store everything in Markdown and make it easy and update everything via Git, which is amazing because you could easily do that too with Astro. And to me, like I love the flexibility that you have, and of course the performance. So to me, like thinking like who should be using Astro, and I think it's like anybody who has content heavy sites, need to be fast for SEO. And I'm like, that's pretty much every business. Like, so if you're like thinking of freelancing, like I think like that, and you're like, haven't tried Astro, I mean, I'm like, you definitely should. It's an amazing framework. And I know like earlier in the conversation, you talked a little bit about streaming. Like, can you kind of talk a little bit more about that? I haven't explored it as much as I wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the cool things about Astro, especially maybe in like today's ecosystem, is it's very clear where you're running stuff. Like, if this is client or server, like it's very, very clear. And if you're not familiar with an Astro file, which again, you can use other files like, Svelte or Vue or whatever, but in a .astro file, you have a front matter section that looks like Markdown. It's got the 3 dashes up top and 3 dashes below, and anything in the middle is actually kind of wrapped in a await async function. So you can do top level await and cool stuff like that, but all that is server side code. So that's where you would fetch data. So you could go fetch that straight from a CMS if you want to, using their SDKs, or you can pull it in through Astro's loaders and get a consistent API with Git collection, Git collection or Git entry or whatever you want to do. But all that front matter section is server side. Everything below that is always going to be client side. And so that kind of really clear distinction makes it really easy to tell where you're running stuff. And
Yeah.
especially with the whole use server, use client, use whatever, that kind of pattern has been difficult, so much so that like Dane Abramov a few weeks ago explained like all the React functionality with Astro, because he's like, this is actually the same pattern essentially. And everyone's like, oh, that makes sense
It's so
now.
funny.
And so the fact that you have to reach to Astro to explain your framework, like I think says something about the simplicity that Astro has brought about. And that comes down to that separation of concerns. So one of the patterns you might want is to load data like we talked about up front, and then just pass it down to the body. That's what we've already been talking about. But there are other times where you want not so much like interactivity, like you might load in a React component to, I don't know, send a form or something like that, or maybe pick options on some kind of dialogue. But you may just want something that's not interactive, but customizable to the user. So for instance, let's say somebody loads up their site and they log into your particular site, and you've got custom data connected to them. It doesn't need to be interactive, but it does need to be custom. Well, what do you have to do there? You've got to reach out to some kind of service, or beforehand in the front matter, grab all their data from a CMS or something else like that, and then show it down below. Sometimes those kinds of calls can take a while. And so they introduced this new pattern of server islands recently, where you can actually do all that, but ahead of time, you can actually pass in like a fallback. So the idea would be you'd load the frame of the site and have some kind of fallback. You can think about it like, you've seen those little loading, things in Next.js, and then eventually the data pops in. But the cool thing Astro does is it runs all that server side, and then it just streams that as HTML. So when you receive that on the client, it actually there's a little tiny baby JavaScript inline script that pulls in and then swaps out that data for you. And so the cool thing is you're getting instant speeds loading, but then you get the customization that you can grab from the server without having to wait on it. So your patterns are essentially either ahead of time you build it statically. When they hit the page server side, you grab all that data, which might take a second. It depends how much data you're pulling in, and then you render it. Or this idea where you have server islands, where you render most of the page immediately upon request, and then you just stream in the couple sections of customized data with server islands. And again, that's a very easy pattern to understand. It's server::defer. And you wrap any component in that, and then it just will grab that stuff and load it in once you get it back from the server. So Astro gives you a lot of flexibility how you want to load your data. That allows you to pick your battles as far as what's most important to you. And that server island pattern is not new. It's been around for a long time. But the simplicity, again, that Astro has been able to bring by coming at this point in time has been really cool to see.
This is really cool. And I think like Astro, like every just talking to you, I'm like so excited. I need to keep building more Astro projects. And I just like always amazed like the simplicity of how quickly you're able to get started. And so like we talked a little bit about content heavy websites, but like if you had to pick types of websites people are building with Astro, that would be like a perfect use case from your experience. Like if someone's like, oh, I want to build a website, I'm a freelancer, I'm building like blog websites or company websites. Is there like, I guess my question would be like, is there a thing that you shouldn't be building with Astro? Because so many
Yeah.
sites you could basically build with Astro and have like an amazing experience. So
Yeah, that's the hard thing, isn't it? Yeah, I would say, certainly as far as what you should build with Astro, any e-commerce to me, like unless you've just got a lot of client side stuff you really need to do, I would personally choose Astro. Any blogs, any landing pages, any personal portfolio sites, like any of those things, any business sites, I just don't see a reason not to choose Astro. Probably the one area I'd say you're going to have to do a little bit more work would be like a full functioning app. So like something where you have like Figma or something like that. You're really not going to build a fully interactive app where the entire thing needs JavaScript. You could build it in Astro, but you kind of lose all the benefits of Astro. If the entire thing is essentially client-side JavaScript, you just don't get the benefits of Astro, and then you miss out on some of the benefits of something like a Next.js. So obviously that's probably a bad example with Figma because it's so complex, but you get the idea of like, let's say you have an app where you've got the whole user experience is a SPA. To me, you're not really going to get anything out of Astro for that, and you'll have to do a couple extra things to work around some of Astro's more advanced limitations. So maybe there I would choose something like Next.js. But again, I think Astro's closing the gap on a lot of those things, honestly, almost by the month. They've, everything from like their image story is getting tons better. They've got a bunch of cool stuff coming out there. They've added font support like, Next.js. And there's just a bunch of stuff they've done to make even a lot of the more basic things you touch just readily available. So really probably only if you're building an advanced app where the entire thing is an SPA, essentially. That's when I would choose something else.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I love how, you brought up like, the use case that Astro might not be the best for. And I think like anybody that says their framework works with everything, 100%, you should just use it for everything. I think like you should be suspect. I think it's like a red flag. And I think one of the most important lessons I learned as a developer, it's you got to pick the right tool for the job. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not your favorite framework. Like if you're really, sometimes it's just there's something better. I have a friend who works for like enterprise company, and they're building micro front ends, and they're like, we're not using Next.js, we're just using React, and then we're using that whole ecosystem, and we're pulling in like Stack router or some other pieces, and sometimes that's just the way to go. And I think understanding the problem you're trying to solve and picking the type of tool that allows you to move quick and get stuff done faster to deliver. And to me, the fact that with Astro, like, I mean, it still blows my mind. Like, I don't like the fact you can just, you know what, I'm just going to write vanilla JavaScript with CSS. Like, and it's just so refreshing and cool. Is there any other feature that is coming up in Astro, or something you're really excited, or something that like I didn't mention that you think you want to share about Astro, or just in general?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll first piggyback on what you said, and that is that I think a lot of times people think it's like intelligent to have really hard takes on stuff. Like this is the only thing to ever use, but ultimately it just usually means like you don't really know the ecosystem enough, or you just don't want to learn something else. And so that's one thing. Second thing would be there's nothing the matter with if you're just like, I already know Next.js really well. I don't really have any reason to use Astro. That's fine too. Like I said, I think it's about what you mentioned, speed, being able to iterate quickly and choosing the right tool for the job. And so I hope though that if you're like a really hard, you're really into SvelteKit or you're really into whatever, that you see some benefits here in Astro. You say, it's worth giving it a shot. And so I'll mention a couple of things that we haven't talked about yet that honestly I think kind of push Astro over the edge for most people as far as just being really good. And one is the CLI is just awesome. Like you can install Tailwind literally with one command. It just installs it, sets everything up for you. You don't have to do anything. Almost anything you want. React, Svelte, Vue, like I already mentioned, but sitemaps and whatever. You just one line install, it takes care of everything. It walks you through everything it's going to do. So that's really helpful that it has such a great CLI story. The other thing is the docs. And like I cannot sing the praises of the docs enough. They are so good, and they somehow find this balance of being really in depth when you need them to be, but super basic if you're onboarding. And so they have this, they kind of speak to everyone just like the framework does. You really could, especially if you're, if you're skilled with frameworks, you could in 20 minutes grok most of the core ideas in Astro because of how good the docs are and quickly get everything up and running. So I do have a course on Astro, but honestly, if you do a good job reading through the docs, that's all you need. And now some people just prefer a course and they want to walk through it. And that's basically why I did it, was for me to kind of walk through it myself. But you don't have to. And I think that's the cool thing about Astro is like its onboarding ramp is easy, not just in the framework itself, but the actual docs are just second to none. So those are two other things I mentioned. And then if I could throw a bonus, it would be the community. Their
Yeah.
Discord community is super active and super willing to help.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Here's Coding in Public. Chris's YouTube channel, definitely amazing. Like you make very entertaining content, really cool. And really love
Awesome.
the channel. And then, of course, if you want to learn Astro, go to learnastro.dev, an amazing course. It says I looked at a bunch of courses on Astro, and I love your point how like you could like go through the documentations, you could learn on YouTube, learn online. But I'm like one of those people that I just want like a very nice packed course. Like I really appreciate where someone thought of the curriculum, they covered. Like that's the stuff I don't have to Google. That's the stuff I don't have to look up. And you just have one resource, and we'll put a little code in the description for the course. If you want to check it out, definitely go do so. And I have a community project that I'm building. By the way, actually, I did want to call this out. We had Strapi Conf not too long ago. We had Matt Kane talk about like Astro
Yeah.
and why it's awesome. Really, really cool. If you haven't checked out the talk, definitely check it out. But I've been working on a community project. This is like my personal project. I really love Astro, and I will also share in the description below. But I created this very simple like website, and I was kind of surprised how quickly I was able to build it using just Astro components, Tailwind, and all your data is in Strapi, which is amazing. So a non-technical person could easily add and change things, which is kind of awesome. And I'm also working on the community loader. We have some pull requests that got more people are coming in to help me out, because building a loader, it's pretty like straightforward, but then
Yeah.
eventually you're like, okay, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. So it's nice to have community folks. And I just love that flexibility, like that someone could create a loader for their particular thing. Like for instance,
Hmm.
we are creating one for Astro, you could share it on NPM, and now anybody in the community that wants to use it, they can. And so, actually, before we go, I do have two questions really quickly. What sparked you to start a YouTube channel? Because I think it's frightening to like make videos and talk to people. Like now, I feel like I could kind of naturally do it, but when I first started out, I was just like, "Oh my god, what is happening right
Yeah, the secret is don't tell anyone. That's what I did. Yeah, in 2021, I had just kind of started learning JavaScript, and I think in December of 2020. And so I heard on Syntax FM, actually, I heard Wes Boss say like just record yourself so that you can talk through stuff. And I'm very much a verbal processor, if you can't tell by this point. So like I need to kind of talk to understand what I'm thinking. And so I just started recording myself. Like I didn't tell anyone. Nobody knew, nobody in real life. And I did it for like 6 months before my wife even
now?"
knew
Oh
I was
wow.
recording videos. Like I never posted about it. It wasn't a thing. It was just for me. And then basically, after doing that for 6 months, somebody found me online, the Net Ninja from YouTube, and he asked me to
Yeah,
do a
yeah,
couple tutorials in his channel. And that's really what started to, I don't know, I guess give me some attention. And then I just kept learning. And everyone has their own reason. I think for me, the main thing has been like know your reason why you're doing YouTube and then stick to it. Or you can change it, but just go after one thing. And for me, it's
yeah,
always been I want to learn. And the best way for me to learn is by talking through what I'm currently doing. So I don't choose topics based on what I think they'll do popularity wise. I just, whatever I learned that
yeah,
week, that's what I do. Or whatever I happen to be doing that week, that's what I record a video on. So it's never been a huge burden for me. It's always just been like, it's an excuse to code. And if anything, I've used it to explore projects and things I wanted to do that I probably didn't have time to, but I'm like, ooh, I can get a video out of this. So I'm going to do it because I want to. So it's, to me, it's been like, that's been my North Star. And just pick your North Star and then stay with it. And if you want to get subs and chase that, you're welcome to make that your North Star. But for me, it's really been I want to learn and I want to just talk through what I'm learning to make sure, do I know what I'm talking about or not? And sometimes I realize I don't, and then that's the next video. So that's okay. So yeah, I think that's probably it for me is like I got 6 months head start before anybody knew I existed. And even then, it's been a fairly slow ramp up because I haven't tried to do, you know, I haven't tried to pick topics that I think would do amazing. I just do whatever I happen to be learning.
no, and that's also a good point because there's a lot of like YouTubers that chase like trends, which is nothing wrong with that. YouTube is like some of the stuff is for entertainment, but I also like enjoy it for learning, and I do appreciate those channels where they stick to their guns and their topic, and they don't trend topics. Like I have my own channel, and I recently just for fun did a reaction video, and they got like 10K views in like 2 days. I was like, what am I doing with my life right now? Like, why is this happening? Like, I can't believe it. And I'm like, but I'm like, you can't like make this YouTube channel just reacting to people's stuff. It's all about coding, and like it's the same thing. What I do, it's just I like to build something, and I'm like, okay, let me build it, and lessons learned, mistakes made. Like, let me share it
Yeah.
with my community, and I think that's awesome because, and it's more genuine because you're not trying to chase the algorithm for the sake of like algorithm, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then the last question I had, because everybody's wondering, it's like your thoughts on AI and what do you think that means for web development? It's just such a touchy subject because I feel like there are some good use cases, but I think there's like so much hype as well. But then like I like watch enough YouTube videos, I'm like, is it hype? But then I use it, I'm like, oh, it's not working as expected. So there's so many different conversations going on from like it's going to replace developers, it's going to do this, and I think like no one knows for sure yet, but I do want to know like some like like a people like real opinions where they're not like pushing a product, let's say with AI per se yet, but just like kind of like from their everyday use case. So do you have any thoughts and do you use it or how's
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot of intelligent takes, but I have a couple of thoughts. Yeah, I think overall, like we're at a point, I think, in the AI story where it's clear it's going to disrupt the space. It's just where and how and what it looks like. Whether that's hype or not almost doesn't matter at this point. Like it's clearly changing not only development, but changing who developers are. The base for developers is very quickly moving from actual like coders to more general creators who are able to take something like Lovable or Bolt or V0 or whatever and build out something that they want to. And I think we need to celebrate the like democratization that that brings in some sense. Obviously, there's a lot of moral complexity about where the dating is trained, the data is trained on and all that. But let's leave that aside for now. But there is a cool thing to like, you're able to as a business owner, without any coding knowledge, you can spin up a little micro app that works just for you. Like that's a cool thing, and we should celebrate that. As far as what it means for actual developers, I think there's a couple stories I'm particularly interested in. One is the learning journey. Like, how does AI affect learning? I think if you do it right, AI can be the biggest help, but it's very hard to be disciplined because what you want to do is just get the thing going. And so it's very easy just to ask AI to do it. If you do that, though, you kind of shortcut the learning journey. But I think there is a way to use AI in learning that can kind of supercharge your learning. So that's one story I'm interested in. The other story I'm interested in is how it changes the developer's role with code. When you first start learning, you're typically writing more code than you're reading, only because you might read an example and then you're doing a lot of writing. As you progress in your development journey, you eventually end up being a reviewer or a reader of code almost as much as you're writing, if not more so, to where you're doing a lot of reading of documentation and you're very carefully like spending 3 or 4 hours looking at all the possible examples and looking at example repos on GitHub. And then you're crafting a solution, coming up with an RFC that, so you're doing a lot of reading. And then at the end, you're just writing, the little code that you need and sending that in as a PR. So you end up being kind of a reviewer later on in your career. I think AI has brought that earlier to the career to where if you're using a lot of AI to write code, you're not a writer anymore, you're a reviewer. And so like how does that change like the actual skills a developer needs, how early they need those skills, who's interested in doing that? Because it is a different skill set than actually writing and processing through that. You're more reviewing what they've done and then trying to figure out what's going on. So I think those are kind of the two stories I'm interested in, is how it changes the learning journey and how it changes the actual role of a developer within the code base. Are they more of a reviewer at that point, or are they still doing some of the key writing? And I think that's yet to be seen and will probably continue to change in the coming years. But yeah, those are a couple, I don't know if they're takes as much as they are as areas that I'm interested in following.
Yeah, and I think those are very like good, thoughtful like things to think about. It's very similar things that I think about. And I think with AI, the one thing for sure, it's definitely going to disrupt the industry. And we might not know exactly how, but the shift is changing. And maybe it's not, like you said, replacing developers outright, but it's just shifting where you spend most of your time. And
Yeah.
the 2 points that like you made, like one about learning, I did find like when I kind of started excited about building something new, like for instance, I have this thing. I'll actually quickly show it to you. Like I'm learning music. It's like this thing that
Oh,
you're
yeah.
able to play on push two. I wanted to create an app to be able to represent like different like chords and like on my push visually that I could like kind of remember and learn from. And it also like shows what it looks like on a piano. And I didn't know how to code that. So I did use like I think I used V0 to help me kind of talk through it and build it. And I got a working prototype really quickly. And that kind of sparked a lot of like thoughts like, oh, like I need to understand like different like musical like scale progressions and how is music represented? How's it represented in MIDI, like via the number system? Like I learned so much stuff that I didn't know about just by going through the process, asking V0 to help me build the app. But one thing that I also noticed is that like it did it for me and I was like, oh cool, like now I have it. Does it work? I don't know because I don't know enough about like the field. This is showing like the correct scales, and so like I didn't have enough like let's say like domain knowledge to be able to
Yeah.
make changes. And so I was like, if I just stop there and I kind of said like this is good enough, I asked it to do the thing, it did it. Now I have this working like project, cool. And I think like if you're just doing that, you're gonna miss out on all the value that AI brings. And so now what I do after I build something, I'll have like a conversation about it. I'll explore, like I'll literally ask it, like, find me resources that will help me learn to better understand what I need to know for this specific thing that I'm doing, and kind of like go read up more, ask questions, have these conversations. So you're actually not just doing it for the sake of being done, but you're doing it because you have this thirst to learn more and understand
Yeah.
how things work. So I think like if people using it as a learning tool and they try to dive into topics deeper, I think that's a cool use case of AI. And then your second point of like shifting where you spend your time. I think when I was starting to learn to code, I always like liked reading other people's code because
Mm.
it was like a great way to learn and get like cool examples. And what I found like with AI, regardless if it spits out the thing that's super correct or super wrong, because sometimes like AI is like wrong, like really, really confidently. It's like
Yeah.
amazing actually. But what I found just by reviewing code and looking at thousands lines of code in like 5 minutes, because with me typing, it's as fast as I type and as quickly I could think about something. If I ask AI to build a feature, I could go through like 30, 40 iterations literally in 5 minutes. And the
Yeah.
fact that I could see all the different permutations of code, things that work, things that don't work, allows me to actually think about it and be like, oh, okay, now I get why this is a wrong approach or why this is like a better approach. And so through going and looking at all the different iterations, kind of helps me to kind of figure things out, thinking about like different approaches. And then at the end, like you said, like instead of writing everything from scratch, I have a good starting point and I could just edit like you would do like a PR. And I find that you could move quicker. And so now what I'm finding, it's like use the AI tools to learn faster, to iterate quicker, but also because now you're able to generate so much stuff in the ideal world, I guess, you're saving some time where then you're able to pick and go deeper on certain topics. Like one of the things that I started
Yeah.
thinking about, like with AI tools constantly getting better, it's not just thinking about the actual code, but thinking about like a domain problem that you're trying to solve and trying to figure out how to articulate it in a way where you could either solve the issue with the help of AI or you're able to articulate the problem so well that other developers could help you. And so you're
Mm.
kind of becoming a little bit not just like as a junior developer, you just like someone gives you a story and you build it. And as you evolve, sometimes you think about like the big picture, the big system, you architect the whole like of the sum of little parts and how they work. And I find that that's where I'm starting to spend more of my time, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah. It is hard when you're like at the beginning and you're thrust into this like reviewer role because you don't always have the context. But I think that's really where the developer mindset comes through. And like a developer, ultimately, like they're curious and they're determined. Like that's kind of what sets developers apart. Like you're like, I need to know how this works. And, if you have that spirit, I think AI can really be a benefit. If you just want to pump out something and you don't care, like AI will help you do that faster. But, I think that's one point. And then the other thing would just be like, I don't know, one thing that's really helped me with empathy with people, a lot of the fear mongering and fear about AI is basically because people are afraid of losing something. And I had a boss once who told me people don't fear change, they fear loss. And that's really helped me be sympathetic to people, even people who are kind of like very territorial about their frameworks. People are sometimes, that way, mostly because they're afraid of losing either the skill set they have, the experience they have to something new coming up, or to AI creators instead of developers. And so I think that gives me a lot of sympathy for people, just like, or empathy, just like, hey, like everyone's just trying to make it through this world. And, those kinds of things can be difficult to fight through. But I think that's the reason for a lot of the fear around AI. But what a cool time to be alive. And, I think there's a lot of moral questions to be asked still. There's a lot of like long teased out implications, but to be able to say, I want to build a MIDI app and just do it, like that's
Yeah, it's
cool.
insane.
Like,
That's
I mean,
awesome.
undeniably. And yeah, there's a lot of questions left to be asked and answered, but I think we're in a special time to be alive. And as long as you stay curious, as long as you stay determined, I think there's always going to be a role for that type of person, whatever we call them. And I'm choosing to call them a developer still, I think.
Yeah, that's you said it so beautifully. I think this would be like the perfect outro for our talk. So no, that's amazing. Thank you, Chris, so much for coming on, and I'll definitely put all the links in the description. Chris's Astro course is the best. I'm not saying it because I took it because I needed to learn Astro, but I did. And this is actually before I met Chris. I'm not saying that like a lot of people, oh, because Chris is here, you have to say nice things. No, Chris is here because I took his course. I was like, dude, this course is so amazing. I gotta get in touch with this dude and have a like common chat about Astro with us. It's been like a while, It's like, and so
Yeah.
thank you again for making time to chat with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And I know I gave you that discount code. I think it's for 20% off. So if anybody wants the course, they're welcome to grab it. And that's very kind. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, it's going to be in the link description. It's Strapi. With that being said, thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks.